In 1996, one big question on a lot of gamers' minds was what was the next generation of platformers going to look like? At the time, there were a lot of high-profile 3D platformers that played like 2D games, you know, games such as Crash Bandicoot or Pandemonium, or even Sega's own Clockwork Knight that launched the Saturn. And since these games basically played like the games on your Genesis or Super Nintendo, everybody kind of knew that this was not the best use of 3D. So the question was, what was next? And the really interesting thing is that the creators of Sonic the Hedgehog and the creators of Super Mario Bros. Had very different ideas of next generation platforming. And we're going to see one of those here. This is Nights into Dreams. This was made by Sonic Team in 1996, and with the game they launched a new controller. And that is one parallel both Mario 64 and Nights into Dreams also have, is that they birthed new control schemes, because everybody knew that to have full 3D control, you couldn't really do that reliably with an 8-way stick. So this was a really exciting year for platformer fans, and there was a lot to choose from. What's interesting too is how different the games are. I mean, on the left is Mario 64, which has you exploring these huge landscapes and is almost kind of has these RPG elements. Nights into Dreams, on the other hand, is this just all-out arcadey, pinball-like game. You know, if you played Sonic the Hedgehog, this is like Sonic the Hedgehog where you're flying. Okay, so how do you play this crazy game? Well, let's find out. Okay, so as you start the level, you get mugged by the minions for your gem things, and you have to turn into knights by going into the temple to retrieve them. So as knights, the goal is to get about 20 blue orbs within the time limit, and then hit that really big squid thing that you saw earlier to blow it up. And after you do that, the remaining time is used for scoring. You don't actually want to finish the level as fast as possible. You know, I thought for a long time that was the goal of the game, but really the goal is to blow up this thing here as fast as possible, and then that gives you more time to rack up points. Knights has a bunch of moves. Performing a loop-de-loop around anything sucks all the gems or whatever was in its reach into this whirlpool, and then you get them. And that's a really efficient way of getting a bunch of gems or wiping out the minions that are scattered throughout the levels. The game demands precise control, and although you can play it with a stock Saturn 8-way pad, I really recommend getting the Knights controller, the 3D pad. You're gonna need all those directions, because the game has a really in-depth scoring system that is actually really great. Much like in shooters from around the same time period, what you're trying to do in Knights is chain the level. And you do that not just by collecting gems, but also by flying through these hoops and doing stunts and things like that. And so, what's really interesting about the way the game is made is that you have about 1 or 2 laps to begin with, and that's, you know, when you have to collect the gems to blow up the capture. And from that point on, you're really expected to know the level to some degree. And so those laps where you're getting all the gems that you need, they're kind of like practice laps in a racing game. And they kind of introduce you to the course of the level, which is railed, by the way. And you use that knowledge to then just totally rock it once you get into the bonus mode. And what's a platforming game without bosses? Knights has some of the most creative, out there bosses I've ever seen in the game. And they're very appropriately hallucinogenic. This really puts Knights' maneuverability to the test, because you can't just approach the bosses in a straightforward way. You're really expected to do those loop-de-loops to cause more damage to the boss so you can defeat them in a faster time. Defeating the bosses in a faster time results in more score. There's a score multiplier at the end of every level depending on how fast you clobbered the boss. Now, you can actually run out of time on these parts, and that actually causes you to fail the entire level, which is not my favorite, because if you completely rocked the main part of the level and you fail the boss, which can happen, you feel like you've kind of wasted some time. I really would have preferred that you are docked some points instead. And after every level, you get a high score summary, which kind of suggests that the meat of the game is the scoring. And yeah, all the bosses are really, really creative in Nights. I mean, they're all very different, they're very surreal. I love this opera singer boss, which you have to hurl through these walls. You have to aim very carefully. And man, it looks like something actually out of a nightmare. It's crazy. Nights also has a lot of great stuff to find hidden in its level, so if you like exploring, this is also a really great game. Case in point, this part here, where if you do these hoops right, this coffin thing or whatever that is opens up and takes you to a secret level. And that's one of the more obvious secrets in Nights. There's a lot that's not obvious, for instance, items that appear when you loop-de-loop in certain places. And a lot of it is trying to figure out how to chain the level properly, just like a good shooter. One thing Nights does borrow from the 2.5D platformers I mentioned in the intro is that the camera shifts automatically. The whole game is pretty much railed, with you just kind of moving back and forth in the course for the most part. So, you know, when it goes to a top view, that's done automatically. That's just kind of scripted into the level. And I kind of appreciate that because it doesn't have those camera issues that plagued so many games from that era. One cool sidetracking feature that Nights has are these Nightopians that hatch from eggs. And depending on how you play the level, that influences both the soundtrack and how these Nightopians behave. You know, if you scare the Nightopians, the soundtrack gets more kind of discordant. And apparently you can get these Nightopians to breed, kind of like the Chows in Sonic Adventure. And if you run out of time, Sonic loses his rings. I mean, you lose your orbs. And you have to watch out for the alarm clock, because if it catches you when you're in this state, it's night over. By the way, you get graded on every lap you complete, and if you run out of time and revert to your human form, that's an automatic flunk. No score for you. I love how the ground bends underneath you as you fly over it in this one level. That's so perfectly dreamlike. So, can we talk about the soundtrack for a second? This soundtrack is great, and I believe that's all chipped audio, that's not off the CD. And I think it's done like that so they can have all kinds of subtle alterations. Graphically, the game is also really excellent for this generation. You know, it does what it is intended to do, which is show off the Saturn's graphics hardware. Although I don't think the Saturn is as incapable as people say, it also wasn't the most capable system of the time. They do a lot of really clever things in Nights to kind of hide the shortcomings of the Saturn, and the game just looks fantastic for it. And the really cool art design doesn't hurt that either. Level design in Nights is also quite good, with every level bringing these unique challenges with them. And although Nights only has 8 stages, I find myself playing them again and again, and you know, it's to find secrets or perfect my run or get that chain just right. And the game encourages this. It's basically non-linear, where you can select any stage to either play the new one or retry an old one. There are 2 paths, one for each character. So if you find yourself stuck on one level with one character, you can go to the other character's path and try their new level instead, and see if you can beat that one. The levels do get harder and harder, though. The main thing that gets harder is the scoring. Like I said, it's mostly a score attack game, which is quite interesting, and it's kind of in line with Sega's arcade roots. The gameplay in Nights is also in line with Yuji Naka, the creator of Sonic the Hedgehog's love of pinball. You know, if you remember how Sonic always had bumpers and springs he was bouncing off of, well, Nights does too. It has the same kind of pinball aesthetic. And not only that, but like Sonic the Hedgehog, you're always moving forward at this rapid pace. You know, in both this and Sonic, you're really trying to speed through the levels and detouring to get bonuses and secrets when you remember where they are. In a lot of ways, I really feel like Nights is a more true follow-up to Sonic the Hedgehog than any of Sonic's official 3D sequels were. Speaking of sequels, Nights only had one follow-up on the Wii, which didn't really capture the splendor of Nights. It's okay, they added some walkabout parts that aren't really very fun. But fortunately, the original Nights is still great to this day, and you can get it not only on the Sega Saturn, but on the PS2, Xbox 360, PS3, or PC. Now, I haven't played those versions myself, but I do hear they're quite good. So that pretty much wraps up Nights into Dreams. I think it's a fantastic game and one of my favorites, and it's also an interesting glimpse into an alternate reality of 3D platforming. I really recommend Nights for anybody who likes score attack games or, you know, even just 3D platformers. Okay, I'll catch you next time, and be sure to subscribe for more reviews.